V Wars is a new TV series on Netflix. It's 10 episodes long, and it's about vampires beginning to take over the world. The premise is from a comic book series, and essentially a doctor, Luther Swan, and his friend, who's a helicopter pilot who works with them on various missions, go to an Antarctic research base, get exposed to a ancient disease. It's prions, like with mad cow disease. They both contract this disease. Dr. Swan is immune to it because he hasn't got the right DNA, but his friend gets transformed into a vampire. They say there's basically junk DNA in your body. If you've got certain genes, you turn into a type of vampire. His friend goes on the run because he can't control his killing urges, and then eventually he forms a sort of new faction called the Bloods, which is all the vampires that have been turned, joined together to have a sort of resistance. And what you see is the beginnings of a civil war in America between humans and vampires. In the meantime, Dr. Swan has been sucked up by this government agency called the DNS, or Department for National Security, where loads of shadowy people are. There's one guy who turns out to be sort of the big bad guy in the end. He couldn't look more like a vampire if he tried. He looks evil, he acts evil, and it ends up that he is obviously evil. And his whole plan is to become one of the vampires and lead them so that he can take over the country. It's got an 18 rating. It's got good vampire effects, so you don't see them all the time. It's not like Buffy where you got vampires all over the place. It's quite gory. There's no sort of real sex scenes and not too much swearing that I could recall from it. What's good is it doesn't get bogged down in sort of emotional talk like some sort of CW show where people are talking about emotions all the time. It keeps on track quite well, and it keeps a level of action up throughout the series. And it does something that a lot of these Netflix series do now, particularly Black Summer is a good comparison, where the episode length varies depending on what they've got to say for a particular episode. So you can have one that's 35 minutes long and another one that's 50 odd minutes long. And it works well. You don't feel there that there's any padding or that it's dragged out. They cut them to their needs. It's got a good enough story. Sometimes you think there's, some silly decisions, but you understand it's to drive the plot on. I mean, one sort of weird plot element is that his boy is the only one that's got proper immunity to the disease. He's got the genes that should make him a vampire, but he manages to fight it off. So it's a big coincidence that he gets the disease. The other is that the Dr. Swan, he seems to be the only scientist in the world that they think can deal with genetics and diseases, which you just don't buy. For something that is so serious and so monumental, it really only seems that a few scientists are dealing on it. Later in the series they mention that there's been sort of a dual effort with the FBI and some other labs to try and find a cure, but really you'd think this would be a stop everything, all scientists that know anything about diseases and pathogens and DNA, you're all on this because basically it's going to change the human race. But that never seems to be said, and right from the start everyone keeps trying to keep it on the down low, and they're all after trying to catch Dr. Swan's friend when they already know that this disease is spreading rapidly. So you think, well, why do they keep going after his mate? There's not really a point to it, and that's one of the things you just have to get over when you're watching the show. I enjoyed it though. But it was very watchable. It's very easy to watch episode after episode, particularly because of the way that the episode lengths are. And I didn't feel there was any sort of filler episode. There's a subplot with a girl played by Laura Vanderhoek, who used to play Supergirl on Smallville. That's okay. She's sort of a vampire, but she doesn't want to be, so she ends up going out killing vampires. But you don't see too much of that. The only thing is, I feel concerned for her because she looks unwell. And I don't think it's the makeup. She just looks like painfully thin, and you think, she's pretty and all that, but there's one scene where she comes out of the woods in the shadows, and you think, wow, she doesn't look good. But you know, she's fine. She acts well in it, and you think maybe a plot will come into it a bit later on. It ends with sort of civil war breaking out and everything going to pot after they try these sort of peace talks, and you have this jump forward of 4 months, and basically you have, in this little sort of 30-second bit at the end of the episode, the last episode, you have Dr. Swan doing pull-ups, and it's reminiscent of almost like a parody of the start of Rambo 3 when he's like getting ready to go into the fight, because he's gone from genius geneticist to Rambo. He's got his shirt off, he's covered in sweat, he's got a gun on his side like that, and it was a bit hard to swallow, but you feel that it's obviously a teaser for a second series if they get it. I think it's worth watching if you like vampire stuff. It's not going to take a long time to watch, and it's not going to offend you necessarily or make you think, oh, I wish I hadn't watched that. The start reminded me of 30 Days a Night, and if you want a short, sharp hit of fun vampire action that has similar types of vampires and that, I'd watch 30 Days a Night any time over this. But that said, it's a good show, it's worth watching. I think really they should wrap it up in its second season. It's one of these shows where they've had the first season of war breaking out, and the second season should be dealing with the war and coming to a conclusion. I don't think it's one of these ones where you want it to drag on series after series. If you've read the comic and you know that there's any massive changes from it, let me know. I did have a quick flick through the first issue, and from what I can tell, immediately there are loads of different types of vampires in the comic, whereas in this there's only really two. There's one that looks like Baraka out of Mortal Kombat with the teeth coming out, and there's another one that looks like a traditional vampire with just fangs. In the comic there's like proper bat creatures and things like that. But yeah, V-Wars. It's okay, it's worth watching. There's certainly worse things on to see. And if you like vampire stuff that's a bit darker and doesn't delve into sort of just teenager emotion concerns and things like that, then this is one to watch.